There is a stillness to St. Denis at night that feels almost unreal, a silence that slips between the gas lamps and hangs low above the cobblestones like a memory trying not to be forgotten. And before we begin today's story, friend, let me welcome you. Thank you for being here. If you love uncovering the hidden corners of Red Dead Redemption 2, if you enjoy peeling back the quiet tragedies and overlooked mysteries scattered across this world, then make sure to subscribe to the channel. It helps these stories reach more people, and it tells me that this journey, this work of remembering, matters to you too. Leave a like if Arthur Morgan's world still lives somewhere inside your heart. Now, let us ride into the darkest window of St. Denis. St. Denis has always worn two faces. By day it dazzles. Its market vendors shout beneath striped canopies, trolley bells thread through the traffic, and the avenues gleam with a sense of progress that the frontier can only envy from afar. But when the sun sinks behind the mansions on the northern hill, the city reveals something far more human and far more fragile. Arthur Morgan visits this place many times throughout the story, from his early missions with Dutch to his lonely errands as the gang's world begins to collapse. He never calls it home. He never grows comfortable here. In his journal, he writes of being overwhelmed, of crowds pressing in, of sad people in fancy clothes, of a feeling he cannot quite name, but which clings to him each time he crosses the city limits. Rockstar built St. Denis to be overwhelming, and Arthur feels that weight in his bones. The city is not hostile to him, but it is indifferent, and that can be worse. It is along one of these nightly wanderings, often between his business for Angelo Bronte and the growing unrest in the gang, that players can encounter one of the most haunting micro-stories in Red Dead Redemption 2. No mission leads you to her, no journal records her name, no map icon acknowledges that she even exists. And yet, nearly every player who has stumbled into that narrow back street remembers her. The woman in the window. The moment looks simple if you describe it plainly. Arthur approaches the corner of Caliga Hall Street, just a short walk from the city's industrial edge. The streets are mostly empty at this hour. A drunk man mutters to himself in a nearby alley. A distant steam whistle wails across the bay. And then, faintly, almost too quiet to notice at first, a soft sobbing. It is a cultured voice, someone educated, someone raised in refinement. The cadence belongs not to a street worker or a factory girl, but to a woman from a wealthier part of life. Her crying is not feral or explosive. It is contained, suppressed, as if she is fighting against the sound even as it escapes her. Arthur moves closer. A window glows on the second floor. Behind a thin lace curtain, a silhouette sits motionless, shoulders hunched, head lowered. "Please, just go," she whispers, not angrily, not accusingly, but as a plea. There is no prompt to speak, no option to knock on the door, no hint that Arthur might comfort her or even ask what happened. The game simply lets the moment exist, raw and unresolved. If Arthur approaches again, she repeats the line, sometimes trembling, sometimes barely audible. Then she falls quiet, her silhouette fading back into stillness. Many players, especially those exploring St. Denis for the first time, assume this encounter must lead somewhere, a stranger mission, a follow-up scene, perhaps a crime or a domestic tragedy Arthur could intervene in. But the house remains locked. The windows remain sealed. No neighbors gossip about her. There is no clue, No letter, no journal page, no follow-up conversation. She is a sealed sorrow. Rockstar includes many such ambient characters throughout the open world, people who exist only long enough for the player to feel something, then vanish back into the city's machinery. But the woman in the window is different. She stands apart because her suffering is not dramatic or sensational. It is quiet, shameful, internal. And unlike many tragic NPCs Arthur encounters, she does not call for help. She denies it. Please, just go. It is a line heavy with grief, but heavier with fear. Fear of being seen. Fear of exposing the truth behind that locked room. Arthur, conditioned by the endless fights and shootouts of frontier life, is not used to problems he cannot fix. Yet here, in St. Denis, a place built on illusions of refinement, he finds a sorrow untouched by violence, but devastating in its humanity. The city amplifies it. St. Denis at night seems designed to cloak its losses, its secrets, its failures. Every lit window hides a story. Every closed door hides a burden. Arthur senses this in his journal entries, where he speaks of the heavy fog of progress, as though each innovation in the city comes with a shadow attached. The woman in the window is not mentioned directly, but Arthur's reflections echo her presence. This place feels like it is drowning in something I cannot see, and she is part of that unseen weight. Her home, viewed from the street, appears well kept but strangely lifeless. Curtains drawn, no laughter, no conversation, no footsteps, unlike other St. Denis interiors, where players might hear bickering couples, piano music, clinking glasses, muffled arguments. This house is silent, except for her sobs. A house with no visitors. It is this stillness that makes the encounter linger long after the player walks away. In a game bursting with action, the quietest moments often cut the deepest. And in this case, Rockstar crafted a sorrow that Arthur cannot resolve, the player cannot change, and the story will never complete. A reminder that St. Denis, for all its beauty and brilliance, is a city built on masks. And sometimes those masks crack when no one is supposed to be looking. In that hidden room, behind that trembling silhouette, something broke long before Arthur Morgan ever passed through the street. Something he cannot fix. Something she cannot bear to reveal. And so she remains there, night after night, a quiet tragedy framed in lace and lamplight, waiting unseen, weeping unheard, begging the world to walk away. There's a certain kind of sorrow that seems to belong only to cities, a sorrow woven into the very brick and gaslight, a sorrow that drifts out of upper windows like a ghost searching for air. St. Denis contains many such moments, quiet and easily missed, but few strike as sharply as the first time Arthur Morgan, or any player, hears that trembling voice from above. The encounter never announces itself. There is no music cue, no map marker, no hint of a stranger mission waiting around the corner. It begins as all true accidents do, by chance, during one of those late-night wanderings that St. Denis seems built to encourage. Arthur may be returning from the joys of civilization, weary from navigating Bronte's gilded world of deceit. Or perhaps he has just left the saloon near the theater, brushing past well-dressed men debating politics, philosophers arguing under glowing street lamps, and laborers stumbling toward the workers' district. The time of day matters. This encounter refuses to appear beneath the sun. It waits for darkness, as though the night gives it permission to exist. A soft sound cuts through the air. At first, It blends with the ambience, the distant hiss of steam, the clatter of a trolley, the faint murmur of conversations behind closed doors. But there is something different in this sound, something human, something breaking, a sob, then another. Arthur stops. The player turns the camera. The sound deepens, becomes unmistakable. A woman crying, not theatrically, not loudly. Her grief is contained, as if she is trying to keep every fragment from escaping the room. It is the kind of crying that comes from someone who has been holding themselves together for too long, someone who has learned how to fall apart quietly. The window is easy to miss. The building looks like many others in St. Denis, narrow, tall, refined, with hints of old-world influence in its framing. But if Arthur steps closer, just enough to stand beneath the glow of the upper floor, the silhouette appears. A woman sits behind a lace curtain, her posture folded inward, her shoulders trembling. Her hand sometimes lifts toward her face, but the movement is faint, almost cautious. The game allows no interaction, no prompt, no dialogue wheel, only observation. And then her voice reaches him. Please, just go. The line is soft, carried by something deeper than fear, resignation. She is not warning Arthur away. She is not angry or defensive. She is ashamed. She does not want to be seen in this state, not by a stranger, not by anyone. Rockstar's ambient audio design is meticulous here. Most NPCs who speak from windows or porches use clearer, louder voice lines. This one is deliberately fragile, almost swallowed by the night. The player must choose to listen. The game rewards attention, not action. If Arthur lingers, she repeats the same line again. The tone shifts only slightly each time, sometimes trembling, sometimes steady, sometimes barely audible. These small variations help sell the realism of the moment. This is not a scripted event meant to unfold in stages. It is a fragment of a life Arthur has stumbled into, a moment he is not meant to witness. She never looks out. She never approaches the glass. Her silhouette remains fixed behind the curtain, distant and unreachable. Arthur, for all his empathy, can do nothing. Pressing the interact button yields nothing. Shooting the lock, breaking the door, or attempting to force an entry, all are impossible. The game makes the house impermeable. In a world filled with dynamic events, where Arthur can intervene in robberies, rescues, kidnappings, and brawls, here he is powerless. This is intentional design. St. Denis is filled with background tragedies that do not belong to Arthur Morgan. Stories that unfold with or without him. Stories he cannot change. The sobbing woman exemplifies that philosophy. She is not a mission. She is a reminder that some suffering remains locked behind walls, a reminder that progress does not equal peace, a reminder that this city, for all its culture and beauty, is built atop hidden fractures. Rockstar uses the player's instinct for curiosity to magnify the emotional weight. If Arthur tries to locate another entrance, a back door, a side gate, a stairway, he finds nothing. The entire building is sealed tight. If he returns during daylight, she's gone. The window appears ordinary again, lifeless, private. It is only the night that reveals her. Players often revisit the street, wondering whether the encounter can evolve. But it never does. There is no escalation, no follow-up, no resolution. The woman exists only for a few minutes each night, a sorrow trapped in a loop, unreachable and unchanging. This design mirrors St. Denis itself, a city that prides itself on progress, yet cannot heal the wounds inside its own walls. A city where grief is hidden behind velvet curtains and closed shutters. A city whose beauty is only a thin veil stretched over loneliness. Arthur does not comment on the encounter, neither aloud nor in his journal. But this silence feels appropriate. He is a man who has seen enough loss to recognize when someone wants solitude. He knows what it is to grieve in private. He understands the shame buried in the words, "Please, just go." And so he does, not because he is cold or indifferent, but because he respects her boundaries, even when they mask a deeper pain. The encounter lives on in the memory of players for this very reason. It is simple, subtle, and unresolved. It asks nothing of Arthur except empathy. And in a world defined by action, sometimes the most powerful moment is the one where the player can do nothing at all. As Arthur walks away, the sobbing fades into the city's ambient hum. The night swallows the moment as though it never happened. Yet something lingers, a quiet ache, a question without an answer. And behind that dim window, the silhouette remains weeping softly into the darkness, waiting for no one, seen by almost no one, yet unforgettable to anyone who stops long enough to listen. From the streets of Saint-Denis, the house appears ordinary enough, a tall, narrow structure like so many others pressed together along the city's aging blocks. But the deeper Arthur steps into this encounter, the more unnatural the house begins to feel. Not supernatural, not cursed, just wrong in a way the city seems complicit in ignoring. St. Denis is full of voices, even in the quietest districts, the upscale neighborhoods north of the market, or the cramped workers' lanes near the factories. Sound spills through walls. You hear a mother disciplining a child, a gramophone echoing an old waltz, a man grumbling about taxes, a young couple whispering by candlelight. Doors slam, steps move overhead, conversations drift from balconies into the night. But the house of the sobbing woman rejects this rhythm entirely. During the day, Arthur can ride past a dozen times and hear nothing. The building is silent. No footsteps creak on the staircase. No voices filter through the shutters. Even when the city roars with daytime chaos, streetcars clattering, vendors shouting, horses snorting through traffic, the house stands as an island of stillness, untouched by the pulse of the street. At night, the silence becomes suffocating. Players who attempt to enter the building discover the strongest clue that the encounter is meant to be observed, not solved. Every door is locked, not jammed, not damaged, simply locked with a kind of firmness that suggests not just privacy, but intentional inaccessibility. The front door yields no prompt. The back door, if players circle the narrow alley, is likewise sealed. Windows, even those within reach, cannot be opened or shattered. This alone sets the house apart, because most residences in St. Denis, even those not meant to be entered, still carry traces of life. A porch light flickers, a dog barks inside, a resident mutters about something or another. But here, the world behaves as if nothing exists past the walls, except a single upstairs room where the silhouette appears. Even the building's neighbors seem strangely absent. Stand on the street long enough and you realize nobody comes or goes. No one pauses to knock. No carriages stop outside. No residents linger by the door exchanging gossip, which is unusual, because St. Denis delights in gossip. People talk about everything: domestic disputes, politics, scandals, the latest performance at the theater, But for this home, the city's endless chatter seems to bend around it, as if unwilling to acknowledge its presence. Rockstar designs ambient encounters with careful boundaries. Some events unfold into missions, some reward exploration, others simply exist to enrich the world. But the sobbing woman's home sits at the extreme end of minimalism, a fully built structure with a single animated presence, no follow-up, and no integration with the broader AI ecosystem of the city. This is deliberate isolation. It makes the home feel not just empty, but hollow, as though someone has removed the life from it rather than failing to place life into it. The absence becomes heavy, a kind of environmental sorrow that mirrors the silhouette itself. The architecture reveals subtle clues about the intended emotional tone. Unlike the more ornate bourgeois homes uptown, the building has a modest, slightly worn facade, suggesting middle-class respectability. The windows are tightly framed, the shutters thick enough to keep out street noise. The curtain, the one that hides her silhouette, is floral, delicate, expensive enough to imply taste but not wealth. It's the kind of curtain chosen by someone who values beauty but must stretch each dollar to maintain it. Inside we cannot see the room, but the glow suggests lamplight rather than electric bulbs. This alone hints at restraint. Electricity in St. Denis is still a luxury, rarely used outside banks, the mayor's mansion, and the wealthiest estates. If the woman relies on oil lamps, it further situates her in the respectable but not rich class, a demographic the city often forgets. A detail many players overlook: the building has only one consistently lit window. Most multi-floor buildings in St. Denis show varied light sources, families occupying different rooms, workers sharing small units, landlords living above their tenants. But here, there is one room with light, and all others remain dark. This gives the unsettling impression that the woman lives alone, or at least alone in her grief. And loneliness is a powerful undercurrent throughout Arthur's time in St. Denis. Even surrounded by crowds, he often feels more isolated than he ever did in the wilderness. His journal captures this sensation. All these people, and not one seems awake. He senses something fractured beneath the polished streets, something that does not fit the city's grand vision of itself. The sobbing woman's house feels like the physical embodiment of that fracture. When Arthur walks away from the window, the sobbing fades until it disappears completely. The rest of the building remains perfectly still, as though the moment he leaves, the house returns to a dormant state, quiet, closed, waiting for the next night when sorrow resumes its ritual. This lack of progression is one of the encounter's most haunting qualities. No matter how many times the player returns, she never opens the window. She never changes her words. She never resolves her pain. St. Denis is filled with lives Arthur can influence. Men he saves from bar fights, prisoners he frees, families he helps defend. But here, he is not the center of the story. He is only a passerby, a witness to a grief that predates him and will outlast him. A house with no visitors is not simply lonely. It is forgotten, erased. A place where sorrow is allowed to exist precisely because nobody checks on it. And that is what makes this moment so deeply human. The world of Red Dead Redemption 2 is not just shaped by battles and outlaws and revolutions. It is shaped by private tragedies, the kind that do not make the newspapers, the kind that unfold behind curtains, while the city pretends not to hear. In this house, behind a locked door and a fading lamp, sits one of those tragedies. Her story is not for Arthur to uncover. Her suffering is not for him to solve. And in that design choice, that deliberate withholding, Rockstar gives St. Denis its deepest sense of realism, the acknowledgement that some people slip through the cracks, their pain hidden in plain sight, unnoticed by the crowds passing below. A house with no visitors, a window with no answers, a woman with no voice beyond a single trembling line. Please, just go. Arthur Morgan never writes directly about the woman in the window. He leaves no entry that names her street, no sketch of her silhouette, no note acknowledging the trembling voice behind that lace curtain. And yet, strangely, his journal may be the best lens through which to understand her. Because whenever Arthur steps into St. Denis, something inside him stirs, something he tries to articulate in ink but never manages to resolve. His reflections on the city echo the same emotional atmosphere that surrounds that upstairs room, as though both he and the unseen woman are trapped in their own ways beneath the same suffocating weight. Arthur first arrives in St. Denis during the joys of civilization, a mission that sharply contrasts the gang's rugged life with the polished world of Bronte's influence. His journal entries from this period carry a sense of exhaustion, distrust, and emotional dislocation. He writes of feeling out of place. I feel like a fool in this place. I do not know how to make sense of it. He is no longer the young outlaw raised by Dutch. He is a man watching his life slip between his fingers while the world around him pretends nothing is wrong. This emotional fracture mirrors the woman's presence. Her voice, that soft plea, please, just go, embodies the private despair Arthur senses everywhere in St. Denis. She is a living echo of the city's hidden pain, a sorrow that refuses to be acknowledged or explained. Arthur's journal often dwells on the idea that the city is full of people who are alone together, crowded into streets, yet severed from one another by invisible walls. He observes the wealthy families parading in their evening gowns, the bankers drinking behind polished doors, the orphans scrounging near the factories, the workers staggering home at dawn. Everywhere he looks, he sees hardship disguised as progress. His sketches sometimes feel rushed, incomplete, as though he can't bring himself to dwell on the details for too long. St. Denis weighs on him, not only because of its corruption and violence, but because of its emotional architecture, a kind of loneliness that feels contagious, like a sickness that settles into the bones. Arthur writes that the city feels sad in ways he cannot name, a sadness that hangs in the air, that clings to the people. This description fits the encounter with the woman perfectly. Her grief is not dramatic, it is not theatrical, it is not meant to lead into a plot. Her grief is simply there, raw, unguarded, and unresolved, just like the melancholy Arthur perceives everywhere he looks. During The Gilded Cage, when Arthur attends the mayor's garden party, he once again illustrates this disconnect. He walks among the upper class, listening to their shallow conversations, pretending to belong. But his journal reveals a different truth. These people are so pleased with themselves. It is all nonsense. He sees superficial joy masking emptiness. He sees wealth hiding loneliness. He sees a city built on illusions. and just a few blocks away, perhaps the same night, perhaps another, he can stumble across that shadowed window where a woman quietly breaks in the dark. Her tone carries the same hollowness Arthur identifies in the city's prosperity. She's not poor. She's not desperate for money. She's desperate for escape, from grief, from memory, from whatever binds her to that room. Arthur understands this kind of sorrow more than he admits. Throughout the story, he experiences his own quiet moments of loss, memories of Eliza and Isaac, the child he never truly got to know, reflections on the choices that shaped his life, the dawning realization that his illness is a shadow growing inside him long before the diagnosis is spoken aloud. His journal becomes a refuge for these thoughts, a place where he allows himself to confront what he cannot tell Dutch or the others. The woman in the window becomes, unintentionally, a mirror to Arthur's inner world. She mourns something he cannot see. He mourns things he refuses to speak about. Both of them are trapped in St. Denis, a city that demands masks and punishes vulnerability. Arthur's empathy, even unspoken, is one of the reasons this encounter resonates with players. He is not a man who ignores suffering. He helps strangers, comforts the dying veteran Hamish Sinclair, listens to drunks spilling their sorrows, assists families living on the brink. In another circumstance, he might have approached the woman, offered help, or at least acknowledged her presence with kindness. But the game does not allow this, and perhaps that is why the moment hits so deeply. It reflects the limits of empathy in a world that does not always permit connection. Just as Arthur cannot rewrite his past, cannot repair Dutch's unraveling mind, cannot save the gang from the fate approaching them, he cannot enter that locked house. He cannot ease that woman's grief. He cannot change what has already been broken. And so the encounter becomes symbolic without leaving the realm of verified lore. A piece of the city that encapsulates the emotional truth of St. Denis and the emotional evolution of Arthur Morgan. In the later chapters, Arthur's journal grows increasingly introspective. He senses the world changing around him, leaving him behind. He writes of trying to be better, of searching for meaning amid the violence he once accepted without question. And it is in this psychological climate, this twilight of self-awareness, that encounters like the sobbing woman feel eerily fitting. She belongs to the same emotional landscape Arthur is beginning to see clearly for the first time. A city drowning in its own ambitions. A world where sorrow is hidden rather than healed. Lives that pass like shadows behind curtains, unobserved and unsaved. Arthur doesn't write about her, but his silence does not erase the connection, because he carries her with him not as a memory of a specific woman, but as part of the city's larger truth, that St. Denis holds more suffering than one man can ever hope to understand, and more sorrow than he can ever hope to fix. And when Arthur leaves the city for the last time, weakened by illness yet strengthened in spirit, the woman in the window becomes one of countless things he will never resolve, a reminder of the world he is trying to redeem and of the people he cannot save. St. Denis transforms when darkness settles. The noise quiets, the crowds thin, and the city takes on a personality that Arthur Morgan only truly understands in these late hours, when the smoke from the factories hangs low and the electric lamps flicker as though struggling to stay awake. It is here, in this version of the city, that the woman in the window belongs. In daylight, her sorrow would feel out of place. But at night, she is part of the city's design. Rockstar crafted St. Denis to be a living world, but also a layered one. And nowhere do those layers feel more distinct than after sundown. The elegant parts of town soften. The sharp brightness of the theater district becomes muted under the hazy lantern glow. The canal water turns black, reflecting only slivers of the street lamps overhead. The cobblestones glisten even when it hasn't rained, as though the city itself is sweating with secrets. Arthur walks these streets during some of the most emotionally heavy periods of the story. Missions send him past the mansions, past the factories, past the graveyard and the market, and each district has its own soundscape. But at night, these sounds no longer compete. They dissolve into a strange harmony. Far-off trolley bells echo against the buildings stretched by distance. A dog barks once, maybe twice, then silence swallows it again. Boots click on stone, sometimes Arthur's own, sometimes the footsteps of someone turning a corner and disappearing from sight. The entire city feels like it is holding its breath. And then, within this shadow-soaked stage, comes the soft trembling of a voice from above. Rockstar intentionally tied the sobbing woman's appearance to the night cycle. She does not appear during the day. Her window remains dark, her silhouette motionless, her story hidden. The encounter belongs to this hour, a time when players are more inclined to slow down, to listen, to feel the weight of the city settle on their shoulders. Nighttime in St. Denis is also when Arthur becomes more introspective. His journal reflects this mood. He writes most deeply after dark, often by the campfire or in the city after a long day. His thoughts sharpen when the world quiets, and the city's true shape becomes clearer. It is no longer a blinding display of progress. It is a maze of loneliness. In this quiet, the woman's voice gains power, not because it is loud, it is barely more than a whisper, but because it violates the silence. It is a reminder that beneath the facade of refinement lies a world of private grief. Her sobbing does not echo like the shouts of drunks or the songs of bar patrons. It does not carry across blocks. It clings to the space immediately beneath her window, as though trapped in the narrow street. The placement of the encounter reinforces this. The street she occupies is not one of the broad, bustling avenues. It is a quiet lane, dimly lit, wedged between residential structures that seem to lean inward. The scale of the buildings creates what sound designers call a compression effect. The acoustics narrow, focusing the audio downward. It makes her voice feel close, even when she is far above. Arthur stops. The player angles the camera upward. The window glows faintly with the warm amber color of lamplight. The curtain sways slightly, but only enough to reveal the curve of her shoulder and the outline of her hair. The animation is subtle enough that many players assume they imagined it the first time. Please, just go. The line belongs to her, but the night amplifies its meaning. In the daytime, people brush past sorrow without noticing. At night, it stands alone, unavoidable, intimate, startling in its honesty. St. Denis at night is also a place where the city's illusions begin to crack. The wealthy do not stroll the streets in the evening. The theater lights dim. The cafes close. The political speeches stop. What remains is the truth behind the performance. Tired workers heading home. Exhausted women leaning on railings. Children asleep on stoops. exhausted policemen wandering in pairs, their shoulders slumped. This is the St. Denis Arthur begins to understand, the St. Denis that mirrors his own deteriorating emotional state in the middle and late chapters of the game. The quiet reveals what daylight conceals, and that is why the sobbing woman fits so perfectly into the city's ecosystem. She is not an anomaly. She is a symptom of loneliness, a symptom of grief, a symptom of the emotional fractures stitched beneath St. Denis's immaculate mask. Her existence is part of the night's vocabulary, a whisper of a truth nobody talks about, a private sorrow that spills into the street only when the city's gaze is turned away. Another detail emerges at night. The lighting design draws the eye upward. In most areas of St. Denis, the gas lamps illuminate the ground, making the streets the primary visual focus. But on her street, the lamps angle slightly upward, casting faint halos along the first and second floors of the buildings. This subtle change guides the player to notice her window, not through quest markers or dialogue, but through atmosphere. The encounter is a masterclass in environmental storytelling, a silent street, a narrow lane, a window glowing like a wound in the dark, and a voice trembling under the weight of its own secrecy. The city at night gives her permission to exist. It gives her silence. It gives her anonymity. But it also exposes her, because in St. Denis, night is when the truth rises. The truth of a world built on ambition and sorrow, progress and pain, refinement and regret. Arthur hears her. He cannot help her, but he carries the moment with him, even if he doesn't write it down. As he walks away, the night closes behind him like a curtain. The city exhales, the lamps flicker, and the woman returns to her private grief until the next dark hour gives her voice back. In Red Dead Redemption 2, not every story is meant to be solved. Some are meant to be felt, and the sobbing woman in the window is one of the clearest examples of Rockstar's narrative philosophy. The belief that a living world is not built only from missions and climaxes, but from the quiet lives that continue whether Arthur Morgan is watching or not. This design philosophy is well documented. Rockstar developers have spoken in interviews about their goal of creating an ecosystem of stories, thousands of tiny narrative threads, some visible, some invisible, some evolving, some static, all woven into the fabric of a world that feels independent of the player's presence. The team openly described wanting players to feel like they were entering a world that had existed long before them and would continue long after them. The woman in the window is exactly that. A life already in motion, a sorrow already unfolding, a moment Arthur intrudes upon but cannot alter. To understand her, we must understand how Rockstar approaches world building. 1. The invisible stories philosophy. Rockstar loves creating small optional scenes that most players will never notice. They call these ambient vignettes, hidden stories, or micro scenes. Some are humorous, like drunks dancing in Valentine. Some are eerie, like the staged corpses of the serial killer. Some are heartbreaking, like the lonely veterans or the collapsing families of the West. But a key point is this: these moments do not resolve. They are not missions. They are not quests. They do not reward the player with items or dialogue. Their purpose is emotional, not mechanical. In interviews about RDR2, co-studio head Rob Nelson explained that Many scenes exist purely to convey the feeling of a real world. A lot of stories you come across in real life, you don't get to see how they end. This line becomes profoundly relevant when we study the sobbing woman. 2. She has no trigger beyond atmosphere. Most encounters in the game use complex trigger conditions: time of day, location, mission progress, NPC pathing. Her encounter is among the simplest: nighttime plus proximity. This simplicity is not a mistake. It is intentional, an echo of the design goal that the player should sometimes feel like they overheard a moment they were never meant to see. Rockstar wants the player to feel like an eavesdropper, like someone who stepped into the wrong moment, like a passerby who stumbled into private grief. The lack of a next step reinforces this emotional intrusion. There is no button prompt to offer comfort, no animation for Arthur to knock on the door, no follow-up event if the player returns the next night. It is a moment out of place, and therefore deeply human. 3. The locked house is not a limitation, it is a statement. Players sometimes assume the building is inaccessible due to technical constraints, but this is not accurate. Rockstar allows entry into dozens of homes across the game. They even place interior props and small stories inside houses that serve no mechanical purpose. So why not here? Because this house is meant to remain sealed. Entering it would change the emotional vocabulary of the encounter. It would turn a moment of observed loneliness into a moment of interrupted loneliness. And that is not the story Rockstar wanted to tell. The force of the encounter lies in powerlessness, the inability to intervene, to understand, or to help. The house becomes a metaphor for private suffering, for the rooms we never see inside the homes of others. 4. Her voice lines are some of the most subdued in the game. Rockstar's voice direction usually favors clarity. Even NPCs shouting from across a farmyard can be heard distinctly. But the sobbing woman's lines are designed differently. Soft, fragile, half-swallowed, as though she is trying to suppress the sound, to remain unseen. Her plea, "Please, just go," is almost a whisper. It carries fear, but not of Arthur. It feels like the fear of being witnessed, exposed, or recognized in a moment of emotional collapse. This exact tone is unusual in the game, where most ambient dialogue serves to fill space or convey humor. Her lines communicate vulnerability and nothing else. 5. Her suffering does not serve Arthur's story. And that is the point. Arthur cannot help her. He cannot even speak to her. And this reveals a profound truth about Red Dead Redemption 2. Arthur is not the hero of every story. He's a visitor in the world, not the center of it. He passes through lives he cannot fix. He intersects with tragedies that existed before him and will continue after he is gone. Rockstar uses her to teach the player something crucial. Not every pain has an answer. Not every question has a resolution. Not every sorrow needs to end with catharsis. She is a counterweight to the heroic myth, a reminder that the world does not revolve around Arthur or the player, a reminder of the limits of agency. 6. She reflects the central theme of St. Denis itself. St. Denis is a city built on ambition and decay, refined on a surface, rotting underneath. The developers repeatedly described it as a place of dreams and delusions, a world of progress overshadowed by private pain. The sobbing woman embodies the second half of that vision. She is not part of the city's grandeur. She's part of its emotional truth. She's the kind of person the city forgets and expects the player to forget too. But players remember her because she is real, because she is unresolved, because she feels like the kind of sorrow that exists in our world as well. 7. She is meant to haunt, not explain. Rockstar could have easily added a letter on a desk, a diary entry, a photograph, a scrap of dialogue explaining her grief. But they didn't, because she is more powerful as a question than an answer, more memorable as a mystery than a mission, more human as a fragment than as a full narrative. She represents the silent tragedies hidden inside the walls of a glittering city. She is a piece of the emotional scaffolding that makes St. Denis one of the most fully realized urban spaces ever created in a video game. And by refusing to explain her, Rockstar allows the player to feel something rare in open-world games. True empathy without resolution, grief without closure, sorrow without a lesson. She does not exist to teach Arthur something. She exists to remind us of the world's limits and its depth. Her voice lasts only a few seconds each night, just a thin, trembling thread of sound leaking through a curtained window. Yet somehow, in those fleeting moments, Red Dead Redemption 2 delivers one of its purest expressions of grief, unembellished, unexplained, and unmistakably human. The sobbing woman says almost nothing, just 2 lines, both whispered, both fragile, both shaped by loss. Please, just go. And sometimes a quieter, even more desperate variation. Leave me be, please. There is no aggression in her tone, no hostility, no anger directed at Arthur Morgan. Her plea is protective, not defensive, as if she is trying to shield herself from being seen in a moment too painful to bear witness. The sobbing is not the wail of someone begging for help. It is the quiet collapse of a life that has already broken. Rockstar's sound design reveals the intent players who stop beneath the window. Notice the subtlety of her emotional delivery. The developers intentionally made her voice small, nearly swallowed by the ambient soundscape. Unlike other NPCs who shout from windows, gamblers arguing, couples fighting, musicians practicing, she is subdued. Her cries never rise above the lamplight. They never spill into the street beyond her immediate corner. It is as if she wants to remain hidden, even as she falls apart. This restraint creates an emotional weight far greater than a dramatic outburst would have. In storytelling, especially ambient storytelling, quiet sorrow often speaks louder than spectacle. Her grief does not demand attention. It merely exists, and that makes it feel heartbreakingly real. A sorrow without context. One of the most striking aspects of this encounter is its complete lack of narrative scaffolding. There is no letter, no photograph, no environmental clue providing insight into who she is or what she has endured. Her room cannot be entered. Her life cannot be pieced together. Her past cannot be unearthed. This is not a mystery meant to be solved. It is a moment meant to be felt. And that emotional architecture mirrors the actual human experience of passing strangers in distress. We do not always know why someone is grieving. We do not always understand the loss behind the tears. Sometimes we only witness the surface, a trembling voice behind a closed window. And the deeper story remains locked away forever. Rockstar reinforced this philosophy by ensuring the encounter has no hidden phase, no escalation, no follow-up event. Returning night after night yields the same fragile voice, the same silhouette, the same plea to be left alone. She is stuck in this moment, frozen in grief, unable or unwilling to move. Loss embedded in her animation. The animation of the silhouette is deceptively simple. Her body does not thrash, her hands do not wave. She does not pace or clutch her head or collapse dramatically onto the floor. Instead, she sits almost completely still. Her shoulders rise and fall in small, exhausted motions. Her head dips forward. Her hand lifts occasionally to her face, a gesture of wiping tears or covering her mouth. This minimalism is important. Emotion in RDR2 often manifests in quiet detail. Hosea's weary sighs, Abigail's soft despair, Arthur's barely audible coughs as the illness takes root. The woman in the window follows this same aesthetic. Sorrow expressed not through spectacle, but through exhaustion. This is not fresh grief. This is lived-in grief, the kind that no longer rages, the kind that has settled like dust in the corners of a life. Her words suggest a story, but only a life story, not a lore story. Please, just go. That is the line of someone who has cried before, someone who knows what it means to break in private, someone who fears what might happen if another person steps into that room. Her tone carries the unmistakable weight of mourning, not fear of Arthur, not fear of violence, fear of exposure. It is the voice of someone who has lost something or someone beyond repair. And while the game never confirms the source of her grief, the emotional truth remains fully within the realm of verified design intent. She is meant to represent the unseen tragedies of St. Denis, the lives that unravel behind closed curtains, the losses that do not make the newspapers, the suffering that unfolds in silence while the city continues its endless performance. She exists in a lineage of sorrowful encounters. Throughout the game, Arthur meets people carrying invisible burdens. The grieving woman at the graveside in Valentine, the mother searching for her missing son in the swamps, the veteran tormented by memories he cannot silence, homeless children whispering about hunger under the railway bridge. The sobbing woman belongs to this group, not because she is part of a quest, but because she expresses the emotional tone that defines RDR2's world. This world is beautiful. This world is brutal. This world is full of people who suffer quietly, unseen, unacknowledged. And Arthur, despite all his strength, cannot fix most of them. Her grief mirrors Arthur's unspoken losses. Arthur Morgan carries his own silent tragedies, the death of Eliza and Isaac, the memories of a childhood swallowed by Dutch's ambitions, the growing awareness of his own mortality. He rarely speaks of these wounds. He hides them much like the woman hides behind her curtain. Her plea, please just go, is, in a strange way, a reflection of Arthur's own emotional posture. He's a man who keeps distance, who minimizes connection, who pushes others away when his inner world becomes too painful. He understands her, not intellectually, but instinctively. And this is why the encounter resonates so deeply with players. It is not just about her sorrow. It is about Arthur's. It is a moment where the emotional tides of two strangers briefly align across a narrow street in a glittering, heartbroken city. Her loss echoes through the city. In St. Denis, loss is everywhere, but it is hidden beneath refinement, wealth, and ambition. The city pretends to be the future. It pretends to be civilized. Yet, behind those windows, behind those walls, behind those lace curtains, there is a river of grief running beneath the cobblestones. The sobbing woman is a single drop of that river, a glimpse of the emotional cost of progress, a human reminder that beneath the city's polished mask lies a deep reservoir of pain. Her voice lingers long after the player walks away because it is not tied to a quest, a villain, or a mystery. It is tied to something far more universal, the experience of losing something you can never get back and having no one who can make it better. She does not ask Arthur for justice. She does not beg for revenge. She does not request help. She only wants space, privacy, a moment to sit with her grief. That quiet, that honesty, that fragility, that is what players remember. Not the silhouette, not the animation, not the location, but the feeling, the echo of loss. Saint Denis prides itself on being the jewel of the civilized world, a city that glitters with promise, culture, and ambition. But, like all cities built too quickly and too confidently, its progress casts long shadows. Behind the electric lamps and opulent parties, behind the grand mansions and imported marble, there lies a vast emotional gulf that swallows countless lives. The woman in the window is not an accident of design. She is part of this gulf, a reflection of the social divide that runs like a fault line beneath the cobblestones. Arthur Morgan enters St. Denis as an outsider. He is not fooled by the luxury or the eloquent speeches, not dazzled by the theater district or the mayor's flattery. His journal shows this clearly. I do not understand these people. He senses the fracture long before he sees its individual faces. But the sobbing woman gives that fracture a shape, a voice, a silhouette trembling behind a floral curtain. She belongs to a class of people the city forgets. Not the extremely poor, not the extremely wealthy, but those suspended between appearances and survival. St. Denis, much like real industrializing cities of the era, squeezes this middle class until they vanish into quiet rooms, nursing private wounds. A city built on two worlds. St. Denis is divided into districts, each presenting its own illusions. The wealthy district offers marble steps, champagne fountains, and carefully trimmed hedges. The mayor's house glows through the night, projecting civility and order, even as corruption rots beneath the surface. The workers' district breathes slowly, heavily, filled with factory smoke, exhaustion, and men whose hands are scraped raw by machines that never stop. The market district swarms with vendors shouting over one another, families searching for the cheapest meal, and immigrants fighting for a sliver of stability. And hidden among these grand economic layers stands the street, where she appears, neither rich nor poor, a place where people work to maintain dignity, even as their personal lives quietly fracture. Her window is a portrait of this invisible middle world, the world of people who suffer alone because they feel obligated to maintain composure, respectability, and decorum. In St. Denis, image matters, privacy matters, pride matters, and sometimes those expectations crush the human beings who live behind them. St. Denis as an emotional machine. One of the most striking things about Arthur's interactions in St. Denis is how frequently people hide their pain. The professor, experimenting with electric shocks, buries failure beneath academic bravado. The mayor conceals his political manipulation behind a warm smile. Businessmen in the saloon disguise anxiety as arrogance. Families on the street put on airs to mask financial strain. The entire city behaves like a machine engineered to suppress vulnerability. The sobbing woman, therefore, is not an anomaly. She is a breach in the machinery, a glimpse into what happens when someone can no longer uphold the social mask required by this modern world. Her sorrow is not down in the slums, where suffering is expected and acknowledged. It is not in the mansions, where servants absorb the sadness while the wealthy maintain appearances. It is here, in a modest home, in a modest street, in the quiet margin between two social realities. She is the emotional collateral of progress, a woman of refinement, not luxury. Her voice gives away more backstory than Rockstar ever intended to reveal explicitly. She speaks with clarity, with education, with a tone cultivated in a household that valued order. Not a rich family, but a proper one. The kind where manners were taught early, where public appearance mattered, where tears were considered a private matter. This makes her plea. Please, just go. Even heavier. She is not just grieving. She's ashamed of being seen grieving. She's a product of a culture that taught her to curate her emotions, to present only the polished surface, to conceal the cracks. This is the tragedy of the middle class in Saint Denis. They are close enough to taste luxury, yet far enough to feel constantly unworthy of it. In such a world, suffering turns inward. Windows stay shut, curtains stay drawn. Pain becomes something to hide rather than share. The Women of St. Denis Rockstar does not shy away from depicting the emotional burdens placed on women in the late 19th century. Abigail Marston, Edith Downs, Mary Linton, and other female characters often carry grief heavier than their circumstances publicly allow. They navigate expectations, societal judgment, and personal loss with little room to collapse. The sobbing woman fits this pattern, not as a character with a story arc, but as a representation of reality for countless women of the era. She is neither the damsel nor the villain, nor the temptress. She is simply a woman enduring something she cannot name aloud. This subtle but powerful representation reinforces the social commentary embedded in St. Denis. Progress may electrify the streets, but it does not illuminate the rooms where ordinary people break under emotional strain. Isolation within proximity. St. Denis is densely populated. Houses stand wall to wall. Streets overflow with people. Markets grow noisy enough to drown out thought. And yet, it is also one of the loneliest places in the world of Red Dead Redemption 2. NPCs rarely acknowledge one another's suffering. Neighbors walk past each other with polite detachment. The wealthy avoid eye contact with the poor. Workers keep their heads down to survive. And the sobbing woman's neighbors, those fictional residents implied by the surrounding architecture, go on living as though her grief were soundproofed by decency. This is not indifference. It is social expectation. In this world, privacy is sacred, and privacy, when weaponized by shame, becomes isolation. Arthur Morgan, a man accustomed to open landscapes and communal campfires, senses this isolation instinctively. He is surrounded by people, yet feels unseen. He stands in rooms filled with laughter, yet feels misplaced. His journal entries confirm this emotional claustrophobia. St. Denis suffocates him, and she is suffocating too. A symbol of what Arthur cannot save. Arthur's story is defined by redemption, by the desire to make things right, by the quiet hope that he might protect or help those who cannot protect themselves. Yet, moments like this reveal the limitations of even his greatest efforts. He cannot save her. He cannot comfort her. He cannot even speak to her. This is not failure. This is realism. Because in a world as large and complex as St. Denis, no one, not even a man as empathetic as Arthur, can reach every broken heart. The sobbing woman symbolizes the countless unseen struggles Arthur passes without knowing. She reminds the player that the world is full of pain far beyond the scope of the narrative. She embodies the social divide that separates appearance from suffering, dignity from despair, neighbors from one another. Behind her curtain sits one of the countless stories Arthur will never learn, not because it is hidden from him, but because the world is too big for him to solve. She is the quiet voice of a city in denial. Saint Denis refuses to confront its own cracks. It inflates its importance. It celebrates its progress. It parades its wealth. But behind the facades, people are breaking. Behind the lace curtains of a single window, a woman is breaking. The city will not speak of her. Her neighbors will not intervene. Arthur cannot enter the room. The player cannot find a journal or a clue. And so she becomes a symbol, not of mystery, but of truth. A truth St. Denis would rather ignore. A truth the player is not meant to fix. A truth Arthur must walk past, just as he walks past countless other sorrows on his path to redemption. Her grief is not an isolated incident. It is a reflection of a city that is beautiful on the surface and broken beneath. Some moments in Red Dead Redemption 2 linger not because they are grand or dramatic, but because they are unfinished. The sobbing woman in the window is one of those moments, a scene so brief, so quiet, so restrained that it becomes impossible to forget. Players who stumble upon her often describe the encounter the same way. It felt too real. It stuck with me for days. I kept going back, hoping something would change. But nothing changes, and that is the point. This encounter, perhaps more than any other minor moment in St. Denis, reveals Rockstar's mastery of emotional storytelling. It demonstrates how a single voice, just one tremble in the night, can echo through the entire experience of the player, deepening the world without adding missions, rewards, or lore. It is not what she tells us that matters. It is what she doesn't. A moment you cannot influence. Open-world games often encourage players to act, intervene, resolve. They reward curiosity. They expect investigation. They teach players that if something feels significant, it probably leads somewhere. But here, curiosity meets a wall. Literally, the house is locked. The window is unreachable. The silhouette remains a silhouette. The game offers no breadcrumbs, no incentives, no hidden triggers. The encounter does not evolve, escalate, unlock, or fade into a quest. Returning night after night produces the same fragile voice, the same stillness, the same plea. Please, just go. It is one of the few times in the game where the player, not Arthur, feels powerless. Powerless to help, powerless to change the outcome, powerless to uncover a truth. This emotional impotence is rare in video games. It breaks the expectation of agency. And that rupture stays with the player long after they leave St. Denis. Why? Players remember her many ambient characters in RDR2 shout, fight, flirt, joke, brag, or demand attention. Their personalities fill the space around Arthur. But the sobbing woman withdraws from the world. She does the opposite of what an NPC usually does. She pulls away. She asks, not for recognition, but for invisibility. There is something deeply human in that. Her grief is not theatrical. Her loneliness is not stylized. Her body language is not exaggerated. She does not want Arthur there. She does not want anyone there. In a game filled with characters begging for help, humor, conflict, or interaction, she stands alone as someone who begs only for privacy. This inversion of player expectation makes the moment stick. The emotional weight comes not from narrative context, but from absence, the absence of explanation, of closure, of interaction. A reflection of Arthur's journey. As Arthur's story unfolds, players begin to feel the same emotional ache that defines the woman in the window. Not because their experiences are identical, but because both express a sorrow that refuses to fit neatly into words. Arthur is a man who has lost much, often silently. His son, the woman he once loved, the life he could have lived, the trust he once had in Dutch, and ultimately, his own time. He does not speak of these losses loudly. He carries them quietly, almost invisibly, the same way she carries hers. In the final chapters, as Arthur becomes increasingly aware of his own mortality, the player starts to understand him in a new way. The coughing fits, the journal entries, the quiet moments at the campfire, all of them shape a man who, like the woman in the window, feels sorrow he cannot escape. The encounter with her becomes, in retrospect, a mirror. Not a literal reflection, but an emotional one. She is trapped in a moment of grief she cannot resolve. Arthur is trapped in a fate he cannot change. She is isolated in her room. Arthur is isolated in his truth, a truth he cannot fully share, not even with the people he loves. She pleads for the world to leave her alone. Arthur at times pushes others away out of fear of being a burden. Both of them suffer in silence. Both of them exist in spaces that feel too small for their sorrow. Both of them live in a world that keeps moving, indifferent to their pain. A symbol of unfinished stories, players often describe the encounter as haunting, but not because it is frightening. It is haunting because it is unresolved, because it leaves a void where answers should be, because it refuses to offer closure. This is a rare storytelling choice in modern games, especially in sprawling open-world epics where everything tends to lead somewhere. But RDR2 thrives on moments that feel unresolved because the world itself is unresolved. The 20th century is approaching. The frontier is dying. The old world is fading. Arthur's gang is collapsing. Life is not tidy, and neither are the stories that exist within it. The woman in the window is not a puzzle. She's not a clue. She's not an Easter egg or a secret mission. She is a reminder that real worlds, even fictional ones built with polygons and code, contain people whose lives are full of pain that cannot be solved by strangers. A reminder that some stories never reach a conclusion. A reminder that grief does not always look like tragedy. Sometimes it looks like a quiet room behind a locked door. The encounter lives on through the player, because she does not change, because she does not speak beyond that trembling plea, because she remains forever trapped in her moment. The player carries the weight of her story instead. The encounter transfers responsibility. It shifts the emotional burden onto the observer. Arthur walks away. The player does too, but the memory follows. Not because she is important to the plot, not because she matters to the missions, not because she reveals hidden lore, but because she is real in a way that almost nothing in open-world games ever is. A moment of fragile humanity in a city built on pretense. a window into the emotional cost of progress, a voice that trembles quietly while the world pretends not to hear. Her legacy is simple. It is the legacy of all unresolved tragedies. She stays with you. St. Denis is a city of illusions. Arthur Morgan senses this the moment he steps into its crowded avenues. The way the smoke hides the sky, the way the gas lamps soften the faces of people who long ago forgot how to smile, the way progress hums proudly on the surface while sorrow seeps through the cracks beneath it. The woman in the window is one of those cracks. She's not a mission. She's not a clue. She's not an Easter egg, a reference, or a lead-in to an unfinished quest. She's a truth about St. Denis, a truth about the world of Red Dead Redemption 2, and a truth about Arthur Morgan himself. The meaning of her presence lies not in what she reveals, but in what she withholds. She represents the unseen lives. Beneath the city's glitter, Saint-Denis thrives on spectacle. Theater lights, political speeches, formal banquets, crowded trolleys. But behind the curtains, behind the lace, behind the glass, behind the polite small talk, lies a world of private despair. Most of this despair is invisible, hidden in quiet rooms, softened behind closed doors, tucked away because the city demands composure, not honesty. The sobbing woman is one of the only moments where the curtain slips, where the illusion cracks, where the city's emotional architecture exposes a single trembling truth. Progress cannot heal everything, and some people break silently behind its walls. She rejects the player's power, and that's the point. Open-world games usually revolve around player agency. If someone cries, you help them. If someone shouts, you intervene. If someone suffers, you fix it, or at least have the option to try. But here, the player is denied all entry, all influence, all heroic resolution. No matter how often you return, the door stays locked, the window stays shut, her voice stays fragile. Please, just go. This moment emphasizes something RDR2 does better than almost any other game. It shows the player a world that does not revolve around them. The sobbing woman continues grieving, whether Arthur is there or not. Her life does not pause for him. She does not become a quest because he exists. Her pain is not an invitation for him to act. It is a private moment the player happens to witness, nothing more. And that nothing more is exactly what gives it power. She reflects Arthur's inner life. When Arthur hears her voice, he's mid-journey through his own unraveling. He has begun to question Dutch. He has begun to reflect on his past with painful honesty. He has begun to sense the weight of time pressing against him, a weight that will soon become the certainty of his illness. He is, in many ways, a man behind his own window, a man who does not always speak his truth, a man who hides his regrets behind silence, a man who carries losses he rarely shares aloud. The woman's plea for privacy mirrors Arthur's own emotional restraint. He is not a man who grieves loudly. His sorrow, like hers, is intimate, expressed quietly in journal pages and short, whispered reflections. Rockstar likely never intended her to symbolize Arthur. Yet, within the emotional logic of the game, the connection is unmistakable. Two strangers, each locked in a place they cannot escape, each bearing grief that will never be resolved. She offers a glimpse of a world too large to understand. One of the defining traits of Red Dead Redemption 2 is its refusal to give the player all the answers. We never learn every secret of the gang. We never discover every truth about the land. We never resolve every mystery. The sobbing woman is part of this world-scale storytelling philosophy. She has no name, no defined narrative, no outcome the player can affect. Because the world is full of lives we intersect with only briefly, lives we never understand in full. Arthur Morgan may be the center of the game's story, but he is not the center of the world. The woman's grief reinforces that humility. It reminds the player, and Arthur, that for every tragedy they witness, countless others remain entirely unseen. She echoes the theme of unfinished lives. The game itself is a story of unfinished lives. Arthur's redemption cut short, Lenny's brilliance extinguished too soon, John and Abigail's hope shadowed by the past, Sadie's future carved by grief, Charles searching for a place that will not disappear under him. Nothing in RDR2 is fully healed, nothing tied neatly in a bow. Everything ends with a mixture of beauty and ache. The woman in the window fits seamlessly into this emotional ethos. She is a fragment, a life we glimpse only at its most vulnerable moment. We never see the beginning. We never see the ending. We witness only the middle, suspended in time. And this is precisely why she haunts the player, not because she is a mystery, but because she is incomplete. She makes St. Denis feel real. Many players say that St. Denis is the most believable city ever created in a video game, not because of its scale, not because of its detail, but because of its soul. And the sobbing woman is part of that soul. She shows that behind every lit window in this city, there might be a story, a good one, a tragic one, a strange one, that the player will never know. Her presence deepens the world by reminding us that it exists beyond Arthur's reach. In a world this alive, some stories will inevitably slip through your fingers, and some people will remain strangers forever. She leaves the player with a choice, but not the one. They expect you cannot help her. You cannot comfort her. You cannot open the door. The only choice you are given is the choice the woman herself demands. Leave. And in walking away, you participate in the world's emotional logic. You respect her boundary. You accept that her pain is not yours to solve. You acknowledge that the world contains sorrow you cannot heal. It is the same truth Arthur must eventually accept about his own life. Some wounds cannot be closed. Some regrets cannot be undone. Some people cannot be saved. But they can be seen, even for a moment, even through a window. The sobbing woman reminds you of this, quietly, gently, devastatingly. Her grief becomes part of the city's identity, part of the game's emotional memory, and part of the player's lingering impression long after the credits roll. She is St. Denis, refined on the outside, cracked on the inside, a place where sorrow hides behind lace curtains and trembling silhouettes, a place where Arthur Morgan and the player learn that not every story exists to be solved. Some stories exist simply to be witnessed. And sometimes that is enough.